Picture this. An Athenian counselor named Lycidas stands up in a packed assembly on the island of Salamis. He raises his hand, calm, rational, and offers what sounds like a reasonable idea. Maybe we should at least hear out the Persian peace offer. No one boos, no one debates. They just surround him and stone him to death right there on the floor of the hall. But it doesn't stop with him. Word of the commotion ripples through the camp, and the women of Athens, raw with grief and rage, rush to Lycidas's home. They drag his wife and children into the street, and they stone them too. This isn't a horror movie. This was 479 BC. By then, the Greeks weren't considering options. They were past diplomacy, past patience, past mercy. They were traumatized, homeless, furious. Thermopylae was a tomb. Athens was a smoking ruin. And the only language still making sense was violence. That is the mindset that sets the stage for the last showdown. This is the Battle of Plataea, when the Greeks stopped being victims and became something far darker. Before we dive into these buried stories of survival and suffering, if you like uncovering the hidden truths of history, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I still find it wild that we can sit here together, scattered across the planet, connected through time by the same curiosity about the past. Now, that murder of Lycidas tells you everything you need to know. The Greeks were desperate. King Xerxes had gone home, but the danger hadn't left with him. He'd simply handed the knife to someone sharper, General Mardonius. And Mardonius wasn't a tourist king chasing glory. He was a shark. He camped in the plains of Boeotia with a massive army, an imperial strike force, holding Greece by the throat. Then, just to remind them who was still in charge, he burned Athens again. Not because he needed to, because he could. The Athenians, living as refugees and watching their homeland get erased a second time, finally snapped. They sent runners to Sparta, not with begging hands, but with clenched fists. Their message was a threat. If you don't march now, they told the Spartan ephors, we'll join Persia. Our navy will join Persia. And when that happens, your walls won't save you. That was the wake-up call of the century. Sparta had been stalling, hiding behind the Isthmus of Corinth, pretending this was someone else's problem. But the idea of Athens flipping sides, that wasn't just bad, that was apocalypse. So the Spartan war machine finally engaged, and when Sparta moves, the ground shakes. In one night, the ephors issued an order that sounds almost impossible. They didn't send a token force. They mobilized the city. 5,000 Spartiates, the elite corps, armed up. But here's the detail that shows the scale of their intent. They brought the slaves. For every single Spartan warrior, 7 Helot slaves were armed and ordered to march. Do the math. That's 35,000 Helots. 35,000 conscripted servants moving north with their masters, plus thousands more allied troops. By sunrise, a column of roughly 45,000 men was already gone from the Peloponnese. So when the Athenian envoys woke up the next morning, ready to scream and plead and threaten again, the Spartan leadership basically glanced at the sun and shrugged. You can stop shouting, they told them. The army's already at the border. The hunt had started. Now, while the Spartans were marching north, kicking up dust and dread with every step, Mardonius was already moving too. And this is where we have to correct a major myth about the Persian Wars. Pop culture loves to portray the Persians as a mindless swarm, untrained slaves driven forward by whips, winning only by sheer numbers. That is propaganda. The army Mardonius kept in Greece was not Xerxes' bloated parade force. Mardonius trimmed the fat. He sent home the conscripts, the baggage, the nonsense. What stayed behind was a lean, professional killing machine, a force built for war. These were the immortals, the heavy infantry who had shattered Greek lines before. These were the Saka horse archers from the Central Asian steppe, men who could hit a slit in a greave while riding at full gallop. Mardonius wasn't betting on more bodies. He was betting on speed, mobility, tactical flexibility. So when scouts reported that Sparta had finally left the Peloponnese, Mardonius didn't panic. He smiled, because this was exactly what he wanted. He knew he couldn't fight Greek hoplites in tight streets. That would be suicide. He needed open ground, room to maneuver, space for cavalry to work like a knife. So he ordered Athens evacuated, but not before leaving a final, deliberate insult behind. He ordered the city razed. Anything still standing after the first invasion, walls, houses, temples, was smashed, burned, ripped down. Athens became a graveyard of broken stone, a scar on the land, a message. Even if you win, it said, there will be nothing left to return to. Then Mardonius pulled his army north into Boeotia, near Thebes. This wasn't a retreat, it was bait. He set up along the Asopus River, in the flat plains near Plataea, ground chosen with the precision of a chessmaster. Because Greek hoplite tactics had a fatal weakness, they were slow. The phalanx was terrifying, an iron wall of bronze and spear, but it turned like a battleship. On flat open land, cavalry could circle it, harass it, peel it apart. Archers could sting it until it bled out. Mardonius even built a massive fortified stockade, wooden walls and towers spread across a huge area, basically a city of war planted in a field, a secure base. Then he waited for the Greeks to walk into the slaughterhouse, and for a moment, it looked like they might. The allied Greek army swelled as more city-states joined, anyone not openly collaborating with Persia. They reached the southern edge of the plain and looked down from the foothills of Mount Cithaeron, and what they saw made their stomachs drop. An ocean of Persian tents, glittering armor, thousands of horses grazing by the river like a living storm. The Greek commanders, led by the Spartan regent Pausanias, did the only smart thing they could do. They stopped. They refused to descend into that flat killing field. They hugged the rocky slopes where cavalry couldn't easily reach them. It became a high-stakes staring contest. Mardonius below in the valley, Pausanias above on the ridge. Days passed, and then Mardonius got tired of staring. He hadn't stayed in Greece to admire Spartans. He stayed to kill them. So he decided to test their nerve, not with infantry, with cavalry. And that brings us to a man named Mecistius. Mecistius was the most popular commander in the Persian army, a towering figure riding a Nisaean stallion with a bridle made of solid gold. He rode up the slopes with a squadron, taunting the Greeks, circling them, raining arrows down. They jeered, they mocked, they called the Spartans' women cowards for hiding in the hills, and it worked. Greek soldiers started falling, unable to strike back. A contingent of Megarians got pinned down hard, on the verge of breaking. They sent a desperate message to Pausanias. "Send help, or we leave." Pausanias looked across his commanders. Who volunteers to fight cavalry on open ground? It's basically a death sentence. Then, 300 Athenians stepped forward, an echo of another famous 300. They rushed down to support the Megarians, bringing archers of their own. And in the chaos of that skirmish, luck, pure luck, changed the story. An arrow hit Mecistius's horse in the flank. The stallion reared, screaming, and threw him. The moment Mecistius hit the dirt, the Athenians swarmed him. But here's the twist. They couldn't kill him. Mecistius wore scale armor under his tunic, tight, engineered, practically impenetrable. Greek blades bounced off. He fought back like a gold-clad tank, thrashing in the dust, until one man figured it out. He drove the spike of his spear through the eye-hole of Mecistius's helmet, and the giant fell. That death sent a shockwave through the Persian army. Cavalry surged in to recover the body, and the field turned into a brutal brawl over a corpse. But the Greeks held. They hauled Mecistius onto a cart and paraded him through the lines. A massive morale boost. First blood. Proof that the Persians could bleed. But Pausanias knew this was only the prologue. Down on the valley floor, Mardonius watched it all, and he wasn't smiling anymore. The staring contest was over. The real war was about to begin. It didn't take long for that victory high to disappear. It evaporated like water on sun-baked stone. Because now, it's August, and the Greek sun isn't just hot. It's a physical weight. It presses down on men wrapped in bronze, 60 pounds of metal turning every breath into work. Sweat never stops. Thirst becomes its own enemy. Dehydration kills faster than arrows. Pausanias looked at his army and realized they had a problem. They were safe on the high ground. Yes, cavalry couldn't easily reach them up there, but they were also far from reliable water. And in this heat, water wasn't a comfort. It was life. So emboldened by the death of Mecistius, Pausanias ordered a maneuver. The entire Greek line, around 100,000 men, shuffled down from the foothills toward the Asopus River. They settled near a critical water source called the Gargaphia Spring. In the moment, it probably felt like the responsible call. It wasn't. Mardonius watched them descend, and he didn't attack. He didn't send infantry charging across the river for some glorious clash of empires. Why would he? He saw exactly what Pausanias had done. The Greeks had stretched their necks out. They were closer to water, but they were also closer to him. And more importantly, their supply line back through the mountain passes was now exposed like a vein. So Mardonius snapped his fingers and unleashed the cavalry again. But this time, the mission wasn't to kill soldiers. It was to strangle the army. Persian horsemen swung wide, circled behind the Greek position, and slammed into the mountain passes, the roads feeding food into the Greek camp. They intercepted a convoy of 500 supply wagons coming from the Peloponnese, and they didn't just seize it. They butchered the drivers, slaughtered the oxen, left the wagons broken and burning. In one stroke, the Greeks weren't just fighting Persians anymore. They were fighting hunger. Suddenly, Plataea wasn't about who had the sharper spear. It was about who could last longer without bread. For 8 long days, the two armies sat there. The Greeks were terrified to advance onto the open plain, because open ground against cavalry is a slow death. But they couldn't pull back without looking like cowards, and in an alliance held together by pride. Looking like a coward is how you lose half your army overnight. So they stayed, baking. Every day, Persian cavalry rode up to the river, loosed volleys of arrows, and rode away laughing. Not to win the war in one strike, just to bleed the Greeks, little by little, and watch them squirm. They taunted the Spartans. Come out and fight like men. But Pausanias held his line. He leaned on that Spartan discipline, the same discipline that had made them famous. He forbade the men from breaking formation, because he understood something brutal. If they charged in small groups, the cavalry would shred them. If they ran, the army would collapse. So he forced them to endure. But discipline doesn't fill an empty stomach, and it doesn't quench thirst. Then came the breaking point. On the 11th day, Mardonius decided he was done waiting. He ordered the cavalry to bypass the Greek front line and hit the one thing keeping that massive coalition alive: the Gargaphia Spring. This wasn't battle, it was vandalism. Persian riders thundered in, trampling the spring, churning the clear water into a thick, undrinkable slurry of mud and silt. In a matter of hours, the only dependable water source for an army of 100,000 men was ruined. Picture the situation. It's nightfall. You haven't eaten properly in days. Your lips are cracking from thirst. Your water is mud, and the enemy cavalry controls the roads behind you. You're trapped. Panic spread through the coalition like rot. Captains started shouting. Allies started blaming each other. The Athenians wanted to attack immediately. The Corinthians wanted to retreat. The Spartans, silent as stone, refused to be rushed. And Pausanias, the man trying to hold this brittle alliance together, realized he had no choice. If they stayed, the army would dissolve, either from thirst or mutiny. So he made a decision that military historians still call one of the most dangerous maneuvers you can attempt: a night retreat in front of the enemy. The plan was complicated, but logical. At the second watch of the night, the entire Greek force would pack up quietly and pull back to a defensive position called the island, closer to the mountain and fresh water. It required silence. It required coordination. It required every contingent to move at the exact same time without alerting Persians camped only a few hundred yards away. On paper, it was solid. In real life, plans die the second you introduce humans. As the sun dropped and the moon climbed over the black silhouette of Mount Cithaeron, the Greeks began to move. They didn't know it yet, but they were stepping into a comedy of errors so dangerous it almost rewrote Western history. Because the moment the signal went out, the coalition fell apart. The center of the Greek line, men from Corinth, Megara, and other city-states, didn't execute a controlled withdrawal. They panicked. They grabbed their shields and basically sprinted into the darkness. And they didn't stop at the agreed position. They kept running all the way back to the town of Plataea itself, clustering around the temple of Hera like frightened animals. In one night, the Greek army had effectively lost half its manpower, not to Persian steel, but to fear. But on the right wing, where the Spartans stood, the problem wasn't fear, it was pride. This is where we meet one of the most stubborn men in recorded history, Captain Amompharetus. He commanded the Locos of Patanas, a prestigious Spartan unit. When the order came down from Pausanias to withdraw, Amompharetus refused. Flatly. He told the regent of Sparta he would not bring shame on his country by running away from the strangers, his sneering term for the Persians. Imagine this scene. It's 2 a.m., pitch black. The rest of the army is trying to slip away in silence, and Pausanias, supreme commander of the Greek forces, is locked in a loud, furious argument with his own captain. Pausanias pleaded. He explained it wasn't a retreat. It was a repositioning, a necessary move to survive. Amompharetus didn't care. To a Spartan raised on the legend of Thermopylae, walking backward was heresy. The argument got physical. Amompharetus bent down, grabbed a massive stone, something heavy from the riverbed, and slammed it at Pausanias' feet with a thud that probably echoed across the valley. Then he pointed at it and shouted, "With this pebble I cast my vote not to flee from the strangers, In Sparta, votes were cast with pebbles. He was mockingly using a boulder to vote for death. And while this ridiculous, deadly family drama played out, the Athenians on the left wing sat there confused. They knew the Spartans were supposed to move first, but nothing was happening. So they sent a runner. The messenger arrived to find Spartan commanders yelling at each other while thousands of men stood motionless in the dark. He basically had to ask, the sun's coming up. Are we leaving or not? Pausanias, exhausted, furious, and running out of time, finally made a call. He decided to leave Amompharetus behind. He ordered the rest of the Spartans to begin the withdrawal, hoping that once Amompharetus saw his comrades moving, he'd swallow his pride and follow. It was a game of chicken played with tens of thousands of lives. The main Spartan column started marching south, slowly, constantly looking back. And sure enough, when Amompharetus realized he was truly being abandoned to face the Persian Empire alone, he cracked. He ordered his men to grab their shields and jog to catch up, but it was too late. The sky was lightening. Birds were starting to sing. The sun was creeping over the mountains. Across the river, Persian sentries rubbed their eyes and looked out at the Greek positions. And what they saw looked like a gift from the gods. The center was gone. The Athenians were far off to one side, blocked by hills. And the Spartans, those famous red cloaks, were stretched out along rolling ridges in a long, disorganized line, with Amompharetus's unit trailing behind like a lost child. General Mardonius stepped out of his tent and stared. He didn't see a tactical repositioning. He saw a rout. He saw a broken army fleeing in terror. And he laughed. He turned to his commanders, mocking the Spartans' reputation. Are these the men who never run? Look at them. He didn't wait for perfect formations. He didn't build a complex plan. He simply pointed at the retreating red cloaks and shouted, "Get them!" The dam broke. Persian cavalry surged forward, thundering across the river. Behind them, immortals and infantry began to run, war cries rising into the morning air. No order, no clean lines, just a stampede of hunters chasing wounded prey. Pausanias heard it first, a low rumble that turned into a roar. He turned and saw the horizon bloom with dust. He looked at his scattered line. He looked for the Athenians, too far away to help. He looked toward Plataea, where allies were huddled and useless, and he realized the truth. He was alone. 10,000 Spartans, their Tegean allies, and tens of thousands of light-armed helots against the full weight of the Persian Empire. The time for maneuvering was over. The Battle of Plataea had officially begun, and the Spartans were caught mid-march, flat-footed, under a rising sun that suddenly felt like an executioner's torch. The sun was fully up now, and with it came the shadow of death. Mardonius didn't send his infantry forward for some honorable clash. He was far too smart for that. Instead, he ordered his archers, tens of thousands of them, to plant their wicker shields into the ground, forming a crude wall. Then he gave the simplest order imaginable: fire. The sky darkened. This is where the Battle of Plataea stops feeling like a war and starts feeling like a psychological horror story. The Spartans and their Tegean allies, about 53,000 men total, were stranded on the open slopes of Mount Cithaeron. They weren't in formation. They were caught mid-march. Persian cavalry prowled the flanks, while wave after wave of arrows slammed into bronze. The natural human instinct is to run or charge. Pausanias did neither. He ordered the army to halt. Then, to the disbelief of everyone there, he ordered them to kneel. Amid the screams, amid the metallic hammering of arrows striking shields. Pausanias turned his back on the enemy and called for a priest. He needed to perform a sacrifice. In the ancient Greek world, you did not attack until the gods gave permission. A goat was dragged forward. Its throat was slit. The liver was examined. The signs were bad. The gods said no. So Pausanias waited. Imagine being a soldier in that line. You're crouched behind your shield. Arrows slam into the bronze inches from your face. You hear men screaming as shafts slip through gaps in armor, into necks, groins, bare feet, and your general is staring at a goat's organs, shaking his head. Now shift your view slightly. Behind the Spartan is a helot. He doesn't have bronze armor. He has wicker, or animal hide. He's a slave, dragged here to carry supplies and throw javelins for a master who owns him. But arrows don't care about status. They died in droves. For the helots, this wasn't noble discipline. It was madness. They watched their masters stand motionless while the world ended around them. The killing was passive, industrial, slow. One of the most tragic casualties was a Spartan named Calliades. Herodotus tells us he was the most beautiful man in the entire Greek army, a perfect physical specimen. Before the battle even truly began, an arrow punched into his side. As he was carried away, dying, he didn't curse the pain, he cursed the timing. "I do not mind dying for Greece," he said. "What I mind is that I die without striking a blow." Another goat, another sacrifice, another bad omen. Wait. The Persian infantry crept closer, emboldened by the lack of resistance. They were now close enough to shout insults while firing point blank. The Tegeans on the Spartan flank started to shift. They couldn't take it anymore. They were seconds from charging without orders. Pausanias snapped at them, then turned toward the distant temple of Hera. Tears streamed down his face, a shocking sight from a Spartan commander. He screamed a prayer, begging the goddess not to let them die in shame. This was the ultimate test of hoplite warfare. The phalanx's greatest weakness is rigidity. But here, that rigidity was the only thing keeping them alive. If they broke formation, cavalry would tear them apart. So Pausanias forced them to suffer. Then, finally, a third goat. The knife fell. The liver was examined. The signs had changed. The gods said yes. Pausanias stood. He didn't shout. He didn't give a speech. He simply raised his spear, and the spell broke. The statues came alive. The Spartans didn't walk forward. They exploded. An hour of bottled rage unleashed all at once. What followed wasn't a clash of swords. It was the sound of wood collapsing. The Persians' wicker shield wall, excellent against light troops, disintegrated instantly under the mass of a charging Spartan phalanx. The front ranks of the immortals were physically lifted off their feet and crushed. Now came the othismos, the shove. This is where physics won the war. The Persians fought bravely. They grabbed spears with bare hands, snapping shafts. They hurled themselves forward with daggers and short swords, desperate to find gaps. But courage can't defeat bronze. When a Persian struck a Spartan, blades glanced off curved shields and breastplates. When a Spartan struck a Persian, it went through bone. Spears shattered. Xiphos swords came out, short, leaf-shaped blades made for killing in tight spaces. This was revenge. Industrial, methodical revenge. Stab, bash, step forward, repeat. The helots surged in behind them, finishing off the wounded with knives and stones. The dust grew so thick men fought by sound and silhouette. Screams never stopped. At the center of it all was Mardonius. Unlike Xerxes, who watched from thrones, Mardonius fought. He rode a white horse, surrounded by 1,000 elite guards, cutting down Spartans who broke rank. As long as that white horse stayed upright, the Persians kept fighting. The Spartans noticed. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a hunt. The phalanx shifted, slowly grinding toward the white horse. Bodies piled up. The Persian guard died one by one, forming a ramp of flesh. History remembers the man who ended it, Arimnestos, a Spartan whose name literally means the one remembered. He spotted Mardonius rising above the chaos and lunged. Whether it was a spear or a stone doesn't matter. The result does. Mardonius fell from his horse and hit the dirt, dead. The sound of the battle changed instantly. Ancient armies were like snakes. Cut off the head, and the body dies. The immortals broke. Artabazus, commanding 40,000 reserves, saw what happened and did the math. He turned around and marched out of Greece. The rest of the Persian army ran, straight into their own stockade, and trapped themselves. The Spartans arrived first, but they were terrible at sieges. Then the Athenians arrived. They tore the walls down, and what followed was not a battle. It was slaughter. No prisoners, no mercy. Inside the fort, tens of thousands died. Ancient sources say only 3,000 survived. The numbers are debated, but the annihilation is not. An entire Persian army ceased to exist in an afternoon. When the dust settled, the Greeks stood amid unimaginable wealth: gold, silver, purple tapestries, derricks overflowing. Pausanias ordered a Persian feast prepared, then a Spartan one. Luxury beside black broth, and he laughed. "Look how he lived," he said of Mardonius. "And yet he came to rob us, who have so little." It was propaganda, and a warning, because Pausanias would soon crave that gold. The Battle of Plataea saved Greece, but it destroyed its hero. Victory poisoned him. He became what he defeated, and that is why Plataea isn't celebrated like Thermopylae, because the victory was ugly, necessary, and real. Thermopylae was a symbol, Plataea was salvation, and freedom came at a cost.